Thank you so much. Welcome and good evening and welcome to the Thursday, May 25th study session of the Boulder City Council. I am Council Member Junie Joseph. We don't have any special announcement today, so we can get right into it. Tonight, we will be covering 3 items, which are Alpine Balsam update for about 90 minutes. We will also cover family leave program for about 45 minutes. And we will do the regional minimum wage update for about 30 minutes. We will stop after each item for questions, discussions, and directions. Now I will turn the meeting over to Noria to kick off the Alpine Balsam discussion.
Thank you so much, Council Member. And we've got, as you mentioned, a rich study session today before us. So I believe I'm going to send it to our Director of Facilities Fleet, Joanna Crean, to kick us off. And just wanted to make a note of a quick note of thanks to our FSC committee members on council. They have seen this presentation, I think, a couple of times now and provided tremendous feedback on what is a really dense presentation. So just appreciate that time. Joanna?
Yeah, that's great. Hi, I'm Joanna Crean, the Director of Facilities and Fleet, and we're excited to be here this evening. And as Nuria was just mentioning, really do appreciate those that have seen some of this presentation before. So we're going to be talking about the implementation of our facilities master plan, specifically around financial strategy. And as folks may recall, facilities master plan was accepted by council back in October 2021. And once it was accepted, the next steps that we talked about were developing a more detailed strategy for funding and implementing the key initiatives that were identified in the plan, those being the maintain our building wells and consolidating services. So we're excited to be here tonight to share with you that financial strategy and implementation plan. And this work has been developed by a staff team within the Facilities and Fleet Department, as well as in partnership with our central finance staff. And the city team has been supported by a great group of consultants, and specifically at this phase, that's included Ernst & Young, and we have some of their folks here tonight to help answer any questions that may be needed. And as you may recall, the Facilities Master Plan provided a fundamental shift in how we look more comprehensively at our city buildings across the entire building portfolio and thinking more system-wide in how we address these building needs. So this financial strategy provides a roadmap for funding the many projects in buildings, and we'll need to obviously implement them over a number of years. And tonight we have some questions for council that affirm the approach in the facilities master plan and then guide staff as we refine detailed budget proposals on specific projects. So to share these specific details of the financial strategy, I will turn it over to our architect, city's architect, Michelle Crane.
Thanks, Joanna, and good evening, council members. I'm pleased to be here. I am Michelle Crane, our facilities architect and capital projects manager. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. Okay, and hopefully everybody is seeing it great. So at a high level, our facilities master plan established a new strategic direction to take with our city buildings, as Joanna was mentioning. It's really a policy roadmap for decision making. And tonight we'll provide a recap of some of the key aspects of that master plan. And then we'll dive into the financial strategy we've developed. And we'll also be providing an update on Alpine Balsam. And we're going to use that as an example of this financial strategy in action. But Alpine Balsam is only one of many building projects, as was mentioned, and building project needs. So we want to talk about the value a public-private partnership could bring to realize our goals. At the end of our presentation, we do have some key questions for council around the sale of properties, leveraging savings from efficiency, and exploring P3 further as an opportunity to realize these building goals. So the facilities master plan was an assessment of 75 buildings, just under 2 million square feet. And at that time, it was roughly $600 million in replacement value. In less than the 2 years since we brought you that plan, the value of our building portfolio has increased to over $700 million. Some buildings, as we noted, were intentionally decentralized, serving specific areas of our community, while others have become dispersed over the years in a way that today does not serve our community well. Collectively, the average age of our building portfolio is just under 50 years. So more than half of our facilities were built prior to the 1970s, meaning many of our buildings are beyond their useful life. When buildings are new, it is easy to turn our attention away from them and towards other priorities. At that time, we minimized our spending and investment in those early years as they were running really well. Our buildings then slipped into and past middle life and with little of our attention. But now, in many buildings, we have crept past this inflection point, the time when our costs to own, operate, and maintain buildings starts to rapidly escalate. In recent years, the number of emergency repairs in our buildings has been quickly increasing. And fixing these old and antiquated systems now is becoming more and more challenging. It's increasingly becoming more costly, and it's putting a drain on our staffing resources, diverting them from other work. An example of this is found really at our recreation centers. So our East Boulder Community Center is at that inflection point. There is an urgency to address the systems and the infrastructure in this building, and in addition, to refresh the interior to meet community expectations, to support current and future use, and stay competitive in terms of service delivery. North Boulder Recreation Center is in better shape, but infrastructure replacements are right around the corner, and it has a similar need to ensure the space stays relevant. At South, we have been highly reactive state for the past couple of years, responding to emergencies on a routine basis, and we've had to shut the pool and other areas of the building down for extended periods of time, which have impacted services to the community. Spending on this building is escalating with limited return. Also, it should be noted our recreation centers are 3 of our top 4 producers of carbon emissions. In particular, East and North are huge consumers of natural gas, and as we consider investments in these buildings, we do see a big potential to convert these systems to better align with our climate commitment goals. Addressing these 3 buildings will make a significant impact portfolio-wide from a climate goals perspective. So our recreation centers are one of our real big priorities to address. Going back and looking portfolio-wide, the condition of the city's buildings can be more accurately reflected in our Facility Condition Index score, which shows the deferred maintenance cost proportionate to the replacement value of these buildings. Holistically, our building portfolio is in poor condition, and it crosses to critical just beyond 2030 if we just simply maintain our current approach to investing in these buildings. This condition is also expressed in terms of funding as an unfunded liability by the graph on the right. This unfunded liability, another way to put that, is the risk of building failure, which is increasing, like we talked about in our rec center example. In the past 2 years, as we have continued to start to shift focus on these types of emergencies, our liability has grown from about $55 million at the time we presented the plan to $86 million now across the portfolio. When we did our master plan and we looked to address these concerns in our building portfolio, our master plan was really built on these 3 pillars of good asset management. Our buildings need to do more than just get ahead of our system failures. And as we make improvements in our buildings, we want to convert systems to provide clean energy and be more environmentally responsive. Likewise, buildings are fundamental to supporting community resilience. And spaces in our buildings can shape our interactions with each other. They can provide a sense of safety and inclusion. They make us feel welcomed. They support mental and physical health, and they create places to foster connection. These finer details of our pillars are found in those 6 guiding principles. And we identified key performance indicators in each of those principles to help assess today's building portfolio against our goals. This is a snapshot of Appendix D that was in our master plan, and it provided a scoring of our current buildings in relation to those key performance indicators. And by just glancing at this scorecard, what we see here is just too much red. We have too many buildings that are in poor condition, and this is creating competing priorities between different building types that support our community in a variety of ways. And we simply don't have enough funding to just address all these needs. It will require some creativity and some new thinking to make changes. And we will need to consider some trade-offs and maybe make some hard choices to responsibly fund our infrastructure improvements across our building portfolio. In 2021, when Council accepted the facilities master plan, you put in action the two key initiatives recommended in that plan that make the most impact portfolio-wide and help turn us in a new strategic direction. The first is to maintain buildings well. The primary goal of this initiative is to phase all of our buildings to a model of good governance and operational excellence. This is the path to sustainably investing in our buildings so that 20 years from now, or 50 years from now, we don't find ourselves in the same situation we do today. No matter what, we will need to make some capital investments in our buildings. However, following these large investments, we want to maintain buildings in a predictable and planned way that lowers our total cost of ownership. This keeps our buildings running reliably and efficiently.
Michelle, I'm sorry, you're cutting out.
Oh, I'm sorry. Am I back in there now? Okay. Our second key initiative was to consolidate services. And those are the ones that are scattered right now, currently across more than 20 buildings to two key campuses. One in the west at Alpine Balsam and one in the east at our current municipal service center. By vacating space in areas around the city, we allow for other opportunities and community benefits to advance. Choosing this new strategic direction at the time we shared this plan meant divesting in current buildings that would go towards consolidation, seizing real estate opportunities in a timely way that supported that consolidation, creating high-performing buildings, and restructuring funding. Those first 2 points in particular underpin a lot of the financial strategy that we're going to get into more now. So the financial strategy that we're presenting here tonight consists of these key building blocks that can be applied towards any one of our major capital projects. First, we know there are city dollars that will need to be allocated to these projects. There are a variety of sources of these dollars, and we are looking to match the most appropriate source to the specific project. Second, there are savings that come from our existing buildings. Every project can leverage some sort of efficiency to support and fund our projects. We are specifically recommending ring fencing savings from operations and maintenance efficiency and avoided capital replacements in our buildings. So this means holding these savings separately and specifically to fund our new building projects and help sustain those assets rather than allowing those savings to just bleed back into the budget for maybe some unrelated items. And we are also looking at divesting in properties and using those sale proceeds to help reduce capital costs, which in turn would help lower our annual debt. Lastly, we will look to external sources to help fund projects. There are an increasing number of grant opportunities that help projects meet climate goals and social values, and partnerships, both with other public partners who can realize mutual benefit working with us, and from private markets who can help us deliver. So these are the financial building blocks that we have to fully evaluate on any one of our large capital projects to really create a good funding strategy. And so now we break these blocks down first to fund initial capital costs, or put another way, to reduce the amount of debt that would need to be financed. These debt reductions come in the form of one-time city dollars, proceeds from sale of buildings, partnerships who bring capital to projects, and grants. And then we're left with an amount that would need to be financed over some term, which is typically 20 years in the city. Now, as we look at that annual payment or that annual debt service, we look at other sources of those blocks to help make that debt service payment. And those come in the form of ongoing city dollars, captured savings from operations and maintenance efficiency, and avoided capital replacement costs, and then partnerships that could bring ongoing value. So now we're going to look specifically at Alpine Balsam as an example of this long-term financial strategy in action. But first, I want to give a little update and orientation to what we've been developing on the site. For well more than a year now, we've been working in partnership with Boulder Housing Partners to co-develop the site. And I want to draw emphasis to the partnership aspect because, again, it is one of our building blocks of that financial strategy. BHP is developing the housing portions of the project. These center two parcels will be affordable housing. The two parcels on either end will be entitled and then sold as market rate housing, and they'll be supporting the affordable housing projects. And then the parcels in yellow on the southeast will create our.
Michelle, you're breaking up again.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you hear me now? Sorry, that's okay. Did you catch those last two parcels? I think we've got.
Missed the last 2 or 3 sentences.
Okay, so those center two parcels are going to be our affordable housing projects. And then the two parcels on either end that are in the blue rings will be sold as market rate housing projects that will help support that affordable project. And then the yellow parcels that we're showing there are really what we're using to create our Western City campus. Shown in green is the shared infrastructure that supports the housing, the campus, and the surrounding community with new multi-use paths, an enhanced pedestrian walk or paseo through the site, and a greenway, which is part of the recently accepted Goose Creek Flood Mitigation Plan that connects the commercial center to North Boulder Park. And here too, with the floodway is an example of a partnership in action. We're actually working with Mile High Flood District to help construct and possibly maintain that channel. The parking garage that is shown in yellow and will be part of the new city campus will also support the housing and the parking for the housing across the site too. So it's a piece of shared infrastructure. And there are many other mobility features that are being designed into areas around the site to help encourage and support alternative modes of transportation. So now we're going to focus our attention specifically on the Western City campus, which is that yellow portion, and what this means when we talk about vacating buildings to consolidate here. We have 10 buildings that we could possibly vacate for consolidation to this site. 7 of those buildings are in the civic area, and when we vacate the staff and services from those buildings, we can advance on that transformation that was envisioned in the civic area master plan. There are 9 buildings that the city owns now that are in poor to critical condition. And this graph here shows the forecasted spendings on these buildings as they are today. The light blue bars are a projection of the planned city investments in those buildings based on the infrastructure needs that we know are there and our spending history. And the orange bars reflect the 2 to 4 times increased costs associated with what's happening when we make costly emergency repairs. So there is some significant financial value really locked up in these buildings. Consolidation of staff and services to the new Western City campus provides financial, environmental, and social value. We have already made large investments in this site, in the land itself, in deconstruction of the hospital. We've invested in the infrastructure currently on the site and rehabbing buildings like the Brenton building back in 2018. So we have spent money, but we are also receiving a lot of value back for these investments. Brenton is a great example. When the city turned to renovating this building, we actually at the time had been looking for lease space. When we strictly look at the cost of leasing that same space compared to the renovation costs we spend, we're close to realizing a direct return on our investment. But we also got an all-electric, high-performing building that now provides a good work environment for staff and better customer service, not to mention it remained a city asset. Our government is physically fragmented now. It's spread across many buildings, which has been detrimental to staff and servicing the community. Consolidation is not only efficient in this new physical space, there is an opportunity to create something beyond the sum of its parts, a connectedness and well beyond what we have right now. Beyond the city campus, looking at the whole site, we will be able to sell back 2 parcels at market rate for housing, and we will achieve one of the largest just affordable housing projects to date in the city. We are not ready to do quite the full reconciliation on this project, but for all the spending and the upfront investments that we are making, we are realizing significant returns on those investments, again, financially, environmentally, and socially. Now back to looking at funding this vision as we move forward and focusing first on the importance of debt reduction strategies. So in the case of the Western City campus, it is leveraging sale proceeds on ongoing savings from vacating buildings. We are still refining our costs for redevelopment, but we're working in orders of magnitude of around $150 million, which would include infrastructure across the site, site work, and other buildings. This excludes the housing work BHP is specifically developing, but it does include shared infrastructure. Some of those cost sharing show up along with the grants in that purple block as part of our initial debt reduction. And then there is the sale of the properties we are vacating. There are 6 of them that could, whose sale proceeds could be leveraged towards this debt reduction. And lastly, there are some one-time city dollars that we would inject into those initial capital cost reductions. And then that leaves a certain amount that would need to be financed. And so then we have an annual debt service payment that's now shown on the right there next to those initial capital costs. Funding of that debt service, part of it is already programmed into our city's budget, but another big contributor comes from the savings realized from vacating those buildings. And then we may still be left with a small gap to fill. But when we don't sell properties, we get hit kind of in 2 ways that are critically detrimental to funding this project. First, we don't get the initial debt reduction through the sale proceeds, which increases the amount that needs to be financed. And then our annual debt service payment now increases, and we don't have those ongoing savings from those buildings that we vacated. More so, we would still be carrying those buildings and all of their liabilities. So that gap now increases to something that the city most likely cannot afford to fund. And so I want to help put the sale of properties, though, in context of our citywide portfolio. And for some projects like the Western City campus, this looks like getting out of expensive properties. The sale of these 6 properties that we've mentioned represents about 3% of the total square footage of the buildings in the master plan. But that does not actually account for the square footage we would be gaining at the new city campus, which in total would still add a net increase to our square footage across the portfolio. But if we look at it in terms of total acreage the city holds, not including our OSMP lands, these sales become negligible, less than a fraction of a percent of the total city holdings. And so it's small when we compare that to the value of getting out of some of these properties. So looking across our building portfolio, this long-term financial strategy actually can be applied and must be applied really to the projects we need to implement across the portfolio, like at our recreation centers and our fire stations and other buildings that support critical services to our community. When we're looking at each new project and their costs, we see similar opportunities to employ these first debt reduction strategies and identify sources of ongoing debt service payments. There are a lot of efficiencies that we see to be gained in how we deliver services from buildings when we kind of get out of some siloed thinking that has historically led to lots of buildings supporting just one service or duplicating services around the city. Buildings are very expensive to build, to own and operate. And as I shared at the beginning, we have a lot of large capital needs across the buildings with competing priorities. And we simply don't have the funds to spend on each one of them. So we are trying to be creative and strategic to limit our trade-offs and those hard decisions and make the most out of that funding as we meet the needs for our community. Another way we could look at addressing our building infrastructure needs is by considering a public-private partnership, or a P3. There are many local and state governments that are confronted with similar issues that we have, and they are turning to P3s to help invest in their infrastructure in financially sustainable ways. So a private partner is a team who would provide investors who provide equity in the project, contractors who normally are national or global firms who work with local subs to design and build projects, and then operators who, again, probably national firms who provide an ongoing major maintenance and operations that would be defined in a contract. And those operators would be obligated to meet ongoing performance standards that would be defined by the city. Private partnerships today, as opposed to in years past, are strongly motivated to achieve ESG goals, or that is environmental, social, and governance goals. In fact, recently the Securities and Exchange Commission has started requiring reporting from private firms on their progress towards meeting those ESG goals. So the city is really in a strong position to look for and then qualify partners who share our values and can demonstrate success on other projects. Staff, we have looked at some of the key considerations that are most relevant to the city of Boulder when we think about the value of a partnership. Financing costs are higher typically, but likely can be recouped over time because maintenance and performance are built into the contract versus the city's ability and our discipline to maintain these buildings at the same level over 20 years on our own. Partnerships assume a lot of risk and liability, but this can be limiting on future decision making. But the biggest value we see appears really worth exploring is when we consider bundling multiple projects together in one opportunity. This approach has the greatest potential to reduce our overall costs as compared to the city trying to complete projects sort of one by one on its own. From our initial look, we believe there could be good value in entertaining a P3 relationship to help the city address our failing buildings and simultaneously deliver on our goals and values. So staff are proposing to explore a P3 in more detail through a direct market sounding. So that entails refinement of our business case to take to the market and then directly engaging with these real market participants to react to what the city is offering. And then help refine an approach that, if palatable and looks really opportunistic, we would then develop a procurement strategy that would meet city requirements. So that concludes our presentation, and it brings us to our key questions from council this evening, which are focused around the sale of properties, capturing our savings from those buildings and efficiency, and investing in or investigating a P3. But before we get to those questions, I think I'm turning it back to our moderator for some clarifying questions. And I think these questions will be posted in the chat. So I will take this.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. Does council have any question concerning the facilities master plan implementation and financial strategies or Alpine Balsam? At this time, I'm not seeing any hands up at all. All right, I see Council Member Wallach.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for that presentation. And this is a very difficult subject. Do we, in your program, are you contemplating the continued sales as we go along of the balance of our real estate portfolio to do more and more projects? Basically converting what we've got into something new.
You know, a lot of the properties that we're looking at as opportunities for sale are really focused in this first phase with Alpine Balsam. But I think that as we look at some isolated projects, there could be opportunities for sale in the future, but it's not like wholesale trying to disperse or dispose of a lot of city properties. It's opportunity or opportunistic parcels that help leverage towards a consolidation.
Okay, thank you. You talk about the trade-offs and hard choices. Could you be a little more detailed about what that looks like? What are those hard choices and trade-offs? Not
Well,
doing something, building
Yeah.
something modestly?
Well, some of them might be, and I know it's a hard choice to think about selling property. So that is one, looking at the value of what it takes to own and operate all these properties versus consolidating to a site. So that is certainly one of those choices. There could be others in the way, again, we duplicate some services now. Sometimes in different areas, we have two buildings kind of supporting similar uses. There could be opportunity to consolidate. That could include some choices and some trade-offs in how we do those consolidations, but they also generate efficiencies that allow us to actually achieve some of those goals and address our building infrastructure. Those are the things I think as we go through specific projects, we would bring up on a project by project basis.
Okay. You talk about ring fencing our savings. Is that sort of a type of dedicated funding?
Well, what it is, and I might lean on some of our folks in central finance to help clarify further, but really there are a lot of savings to be gained. We've quantified this a couple different ways through our master plan and then again through this work. When we consolidate, there is efficiency. What we are talking about is really ensuring that we identify those savings very specifically and then hold on to them year over year as part of a debt service payment and not let them just kind of get reabsorbed as savings back into the budget.
Okay. Well, what happens if those savings are not realized for whatever reason? The structure doesn't require the emergency repairs, or remedial work, because in effect you're taking money saved, not real money. You're saying the money is saved, and that savings we want to apply to a project.
Yeah, so we've historically done this, and it's been done for years in a simpler form. You might be familiar with this energy performance contracting, or EPC, where a firm or a company comes in. We can do this as well ourselves, and they define an amount of savings and energy efficiency. It's normally very conservative. We would not be trying to estimate savings on projected emergency failures. It's really, we've within a fairly conservative band have recognized the kind of operations and maintenance now that we're spending, which is about 2 times the industry standard. And that we know actually through our work on the Brenton building that we can achieve an industry standard, which is about half that. And so any savings we're looking to leverage towards a debt service would be very conservative.
Okay, just a couple more. How do the financing rates available, the rates available for debt financing in P3 projects compare to the rates we would have to pay in conventional mortgage financing or in bond financing? Or is that simply a matter of negotiation?
Well, that's really where we'd love to go out directly to the markets and start talking to them. That's really the nod, that we're looking for is we've been kind of playing around with hypothetical numbers. And again, we have our consultants and I know our finance team who could look more, but we'd like to discuss those specifically with market stakeholders.
And the last question, I guess, is when you talk about the public-private partnerships, have you thought to what those might look like? Is it a build to suit where we rent the building or have shared equity in the building? Have you focused on or determined what that structure would look like to you and what you would want to achieve?
We've kind of looked at a variety of things over the years, and we recognize the value in the city owning the property. So not really looking to kind of lease back, if you will. The city's a long-term tenant. We're not going anywhere, and there's value in our ownership properties. The types of P3s that we've been considering are things like infrastructure as a service, where we do have an operator who might come in and be able to operate some of our new major mechanical systems a lot more efficiently and effectively, and if that is actually leveraged over a number of buildings, they bring a lot of economy to scale in parts and servicing buildings. And so that might be the type of partnership we're entertaining. But again, I think a very structured way of going out and talking to the markets would also probably bring some more insight to what's there. But the city wanting to still hold a pretty significant position in our.
Okay, that's all I've got, and thank you for a really, really excellent presentation. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mark. Now we have Nicole. Go ahead with your questions.
Thank you. And thanks so much for the presentation. It never gets old. Thank you. So one of the things that I was wondering about was just if we didn't sell these buildings that are kind of at end of life, what would we do with them? Do we have to maintain them? Is there a cost to just kind of vacating the buildings and banking the land or something like that? I mean, what's the alternative if we weren't going to sell the buildings?
Well, a lot of these properties are located like right in the downtown core. And so, you know, if you sell a building, it can become a blight. And you know, it becomes a risk. In fact, it's one thing we've been mitigating up at the Alpine Boston site with the vacant hospital. We put a lot of energy into securing that property. And, you know, from value to the community, you really want to activate these areas. And I think that there's a potential for, you know, as development comes over, for us to guide how those sales could go. There's certainly ways that we can position, you know, who that sale might go to that really meets more community values. But yeah, we would be in a position to keep investing in those properties. And I think selling them would probably not be a great option. It would be something, you know, trying to figure out a new use, but then we're just adding to the portfolio.
Thank you. And then another question with this sort of method, that the financial strategy that you demonstrated with the Alpine Balsam project, I mean, do you anticipate that if we kind of do this at that site and move forward in a way that more intentionally thinks about how we're maintaining buildings over time, will we end up in a place where we're not having to sell buildings to pay for the maintenance of buildings that we really should have been saving some money for and dealing with decades ago? Is this sort of a one-time thing? Is it something that's going to set a precedent that we sell buildings and land every time a building approaches the end of its life? Are we from here on out going to be accounting for adequate maintenance costs and how we save for that? Sorry, that was like 5 questions in one.
Yeah, no, I think I've got them though, but it is the fundamental principle in that Maintain Well initiative is that once we make these large investments, we put that 2% to 4% current replacement value annually towards those buildings to maintain them over their life. So we are not selling properties. We don't want to be back in this position. It is another element that P3s sometimes put into their actual upfront bids and proposals is that ongoing maintenance. So in some ways that maintenance can be baked into those payments naturally that way, which helps create some discipline to, again, keep performing and being ahead of the curve. But it's exactly what we don't want to do is be selling properties again in 20 years or kind of getting behind. So Maintain Well is that initiative that funds buildings in a way we can sustain them.
Okay, and just kind of one other follow-up question about the ring fencing strategy. This, 2 to 4% that we're kind of setting aside for maintenance costs, that we know are going to come, so that in 20 or 30 years, future council isn't having to sell stuff off to pay for new buildings. When the debt is paid off, is that the sort of realized savings going toward that 2 to 4%? Is the 2 to 4% that we're saving over time in addition to the savings that we're applying toward debt? I mean, I guess what I'm wondering is, do we have that the savings that's applying toward the debt as well as sort of a depreciation that we are kind of filling in with savings so that we're thinking about the eventual, replacement costs or maintenance costs of buildings as they age?
Yeah, I think I get, so there's 2 different pieces. There's 2 to 4%, which we recommend on all buildings, which is of the replacement value. And that is to invest in future infrastructure costs. The savings that we're talking about ring fencing are kind of born out of the inefficiency now. So in our budgets, we're spending more than we could in an efficient budget or an efficient building. We'll take those savings and apply it. And I think to your point, we'll apply that to pay debt over, we'll say 20 years. At the end of that, those savings that we continue to see will become all city savings. So once we pay that debt, you get to realize those additional savings just back in the budget. There's different structures about how we structure through the debt service and then after those 2 to 4% that keeps that ongoing maintenance. And again, that's where a partnership structures those in a lot of times. As we look at our funding model and our debt model, if we end up self-performing, would look at how we fund in that future ongoing maintenance. Does that answer?
Yeah, no, thank you. That helps. Thank you. So it's not that we're sort of maintaining two separate things that we're trying to save for over time. Once the debt's kind of paid off, then those are broader realized savings that we have there. And then one final question, just to make sure I understood. Really appreciated the slide that showed these buildings in the context of all the property and buildings that we have. So it sounds like we're basically gaining about 100,000 square feet of building space at Alpine Balsam, and we would be losing about 56,000 square feet of space in other buildings that we'd be selling. So we would have like a net gain of almost 50,000 square feet. Did I get that right?
Yeah. Roughly, that's where we're balancing based on a lot of the discussion here tonight and understanding we're balancing that total opportunity at Alpine Balsam. But yes, we would be at a net gain overall.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Nicole. Mark?
Yeah, forgive me for going again. I just forgot one question. With a portfolio with a replacement value of over $700 million, 2 to 4% annually is $14 to $28 million allocated towards this project of having sufficient funds for redevelopment or reconstruction or whatever. That's, I think it's desirable, but it's a pretty big ask.
If I understand your question, I think, so we're not talking about getting 2 to 4% of 700 million right now. I think that's part of the idea, is phasing in as we make really large capital investments in buildings. That's when the ask comes on the heels of that, the annual budget ask is, now let's maintain this new well-performing building well. So it's a phased in approach, and hopefully then consolidation helps, bring down some of that and provide some efficiency. But yeah, it's a very phased in over the entire building portfolio. I'm not even sure when we would quite get there. But
thank you. That you've answered it perfectly. Thanks.
Are there any other questions at this time from fellow council members? I don't see any. I don't see anyone's hands up, but I did have a clarifying question from a comment that was made by Council Member Mark Wallach. And it was about when you talked about the sale of our real estate portfolio for conversion to more projects. And I think the comment was, I just want to make sure that I was clear. You said this is an opportunity for sale is actually to focus, to use the money for Alpine Balsam at this time. Is that correct? Did I understand that correctly?
The properties that we're currently looking to sell would be used towards Alpine Balsam because they're specifically taking the services in those buildings now and consolidating them there. In the future, there could be something where, we're building a new fire station, a new location, and we're, moving. And so then, the sale would be directly relative to the project that's moving forward.
Thank you. I do have another question for you. And I'm not sure I saw that when I was reading through the packet, analysis of highest and best use value research for the sale of these current properties, because ultimately we live in Boulder. I mean, I can think of housing. We need more housing. Yes, we're selling older properties that we have, but are we looking at, okay, are we just selling them? It really doesn't matter what happened to them once they're sold, Or are we doing also analysis and also ensuring that, hey, maybe this property should be used for this particular intent?
Yeah, we would do some detailed analysis on the value, because unlike maybe, just a developer who's looking for just monetary value, we can go out and define the social environmental values that would be attached to that and really guide how properties would be redeveloped. So that would be definitely another detailed piece of looking at how these properties are disposed of.
Thank you so much. Now, seeing no further questions coming from council, we do have 3 questions to help direct staff. The first one, does council agree with the approach to selling properties and using proceeds to fund projects advancing the key initiatives of the facilities master plan? Who wants to go first? Hello, wake up. We'll go with Council Member Spear, and then we have Council Member Wallach.
Thanks. I think Mark's hand just beat mine though. Junie, I was wondering, can we just answer all 3 of these questions as we're commenting? Is that okay?
You know what? I think that's a great idea. And would you let me repeat all 3 of them? So the first one, do we agree with the approach to selling properties and using the proceed to fund projects advancing the key initiative of the facilities master plan? Does council support ring fencing captured saving to finance annual debt services payments and fund on ongoing operations and maintenance of city buildings? And the third one, does council support further investigation of the public-private partnership to build, operate, and maintain facilities through direct engagement with the private market? Go ahead, Nicole.
For me, then it's yes, yes, and yes. I think this is a really clever solution to a problem that none of us really created, but we're now forced to solve. And so thank you to facilities, thank you to finance, thank you to staff for coming up with these clever solutions out of our tricky, hard problems. I heard you say on that last one, staff, just that we would be making sure that these public-private partnerships, any that we would be looking into, are really aligned with our city values and goals and priorities, things that we're trying to achieve. And I'm very supportive of that approach. And I think it would be wonderful for council to hear a little bit more, if my colleagues agree, as some of those details get sorted out, just to hear a little bit more about that. So. But thank you so much for all this work. Really appreciate it. Wonderful work.
Thank you, Nicole. Now we'll go with Mark and then Aaron.
In the interest of brevity, yes, yes, and yes. Thank you.
Oh, awesome. Aaron, can you make it shorter?
I'm going to go just slightly longer, but yes, agree with my colleagues. Fantastic work, very creative financing approaches here. I'll just say on the number 1, definitely agree with the approach. I know you're thinking about the future of work, but I just want to encourage you to continue that, right? Like as we continue to have remote work be a really big and important part of the city organization, to just think about maybe there's one other building that we could consolidate away from, as we're able to be more thrifty with our use of space and hoteling spaces and things like that. So I know you're thinking about that, but just wanted to emphasize that because we could go even a little bit further with the consolidation, based on how things may look like in the future. And then I'll just say, I think the ring fencing is a good idea. I would just want to preserve some flexibility in the event of future emergencies, right? Like if we're having to cut city services left and right and pull down our reserves, maybe we think about potentially accessing some of these funds as well. So they should be identified, the savings should be identified in debt and used for that purpose. But in case of emergency, just maybe to preserve some flexibility. And appreciate what Nicole said about the P3s being reflective of Boulder's values, and to pass on more details as you get them. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Aaron. Are there any other council members? I mean, to give direction, I think having a majority of those who are present would be helpful. So Rachel and Bob, do you have any comments? And maybe Matt as well. Matt, I see your hands up, and then Yes, go ahead, Matt, followed by Rachel and then Bob.
Thanks, Junie. We'll keep it simple so we get clear yes, yes, and yes, and share thoughts of my colleagues on all those pieces. They said it well. And thanks for the presentation. I thought it was really well detailed, and the intentionality around thinking about these things is really important as we face some of these tougher challenges or get exposed in some of our vulnerabilities in our portfolio. So thanks for the adaptation and sort of trying to maintain that robust portfolio going forward. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Matt. Rachel?
I'll be a triple yes as well.
Thank you, Rachel. Bob?
Ditto on the triple yes.
Thank you very much all. And I just want to add, thank you staff for this great presentation. And I don't have any more to add, but to say yes, yes, and yes. And that it was such a great presentation. We get it. Thank you so much. And thank you very much for all the work. I think Council Member Spear just put some appreciation on the chat for the presentation as well. So thank you for the great presentation, greatly appreciated. And there's no further discussion on this one at this time. And I wonder, did staff get everything that it needed in order to move forward today?
Yes, I think
We did.
Yeah. Thank you,
Awesome.
everyone. Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Now we will move on to the discussion to reaffirm the family participation, seasonal and temporary employee benefits. And I will pass the baton to Nuria.
Thank you so much, Council Member. And last time we were talking about the Colorado Family and Medical Leave Insurance Program. We came to you in November to pass a resolution saying we are sticking sort of with our city leave program because it offered, in our estimation, better benefits as we move forward. But we took to heart what you had mentioned to us about, can we look a little bit more at the kind of benefits and support that we provide our seasonal and temporary employees. And our Chief Human Resources Director Officer is here to tell you a little bit more about that foray into the work. So I pass it on to David.
Thank you, Nuria. Appreciate the introduction. I am David Bell, the Chief Human Resources Officer. I'm happy to be here this evening and visiting with all of you about seasonal and temporary employee benefits, primarily around leave support, income support, and it is related to the Colorado Family and Medical Leave Insurance Program. I'd love to just jump into the slides and have them walk us through our conversation a little bit this evening and end with a touch of discussion and questions. So we'll jump into the next slide, please. It was November in which we had conversation on the family program. November 3rd, 2022, we recommended as staff to the City Council to opt out of the Colorado Family Insurance Program. What that did was it delayed any participation until we opt in a future date, if we so choose, to this family insurance program. The year of 2023 is a contribution only with no benefits paid for any participants. We have an opportunity to jump in at any future date at the start of a year. We have to reaffirm formally with the state of Colorado once every 8 years our participation status for the Colorado Family Program. Employees are able to direct participate to the state program by their own hand. Another option that was available that we also did not choose was to facilitate employee choice payroll deductions to the state of Colorado. One other piece of background, we did choose to recommend the opt-out of this program, as did many other municipalities at this time. We have that option where private employers do not for this particular program. We are interested in watching the development of the program over time. And given that we have collective bargaining agreements that have certain benefits in place and certain insurances that support various aspects of leave management, it was important for us to be able to take time to study all the different programs that are available to us and build the best program and make changes over the appropriate timeline for our benefits support. Next slide, please. On November 3rd, there was discussion prior to the opt-out vote to, as Nuria mentioned, investigate ways to support our seasonal and temporary employees. Now, the message was delivered and received around the support that could be offered to seasonal and temporary employees, often our lower wage earners, partially based on the rate of pay for certain positions, but also just on the length of employment and the volume of hours per week. We often employ individuals for less than a full year in a seasonal capacity, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and any variable in between. And those seasonal positions could be 15 hours a week, 10 hours a week, up to 35 hours a week. We also have temporary employees, and they receive a certain portion of benefits, and they could be full-time for up to generally a year, but we don't go beyond that for temporary employees in most cases. We also know that we have a number of seasonal employees who return season after season. So we might have folks who return 3 or 4 or 5 years in a row, and we actually have some folks who work in seasonal roles who have been here for a double-digit years of employment with the city of Boulder. So we did look into on the request of City Council, some options that could be available for us in support of our seasonal and temporary employees in regards to leave support, and income replacement. First and foremost, we worked with our vendors. We actually have a short-term disability program, and that vendor, we engage with that group around the cost to process and not only process claims, but support income replacement for seasonal and temporary employees. We asked about building a program specific for the city of Boulder through one of our vendors that also added absences for care of family member, which most short-term disability plans do not do. What we've learned is that there's a lack of desire by most vendors to participate in kind of an income support for non-personal injury or illness. And we began watching with our local partners options they were using. And we have seen some transition into kind of a local run program similar to Colorado Family, and a handful of others have participated in Colorado Family. Next slide, please. Here's a touch more about our program review. We did review not only the leave management piece, but also other seasonal employee benefits. With certain hours of work on a schedule and in a planned employment engagement, seasonal and temporary employees may in fact be eligible for medical leave, dental leave, medical insurance, dental insurance, and earning of some paid sick time. But there are limits to that amount of sick time depending on the employment type. But we actually reviewed a bit of our medical insurance benefits and our disability benefits and leave management benefits. Next slide, please. So this evening, I'm here to share that we are recommending the staff of Human Resources to not address our participation status with the City of Boulder during 2023. That would be for any potential implementation or use of the program in 2024. Again, we can go back and make changes to participate at a future date, but at this time, with the web of benefits that we provide in different manners to all of our different employees, we're not here to make a recommendation of change at this particular time. Next slide. We are here to talk about some ideas and thoughts that we think are implementable, which we're calling our Boulder program or Boulder Leave program. What we've done is we have developed a framework for a program that could provide support to the seasonal and temporary employee benefits, specifically for income replacement in the event of personal injury and illness and family illness or injury. What that looks like for us is trying to support with income replacement small numbers of individuals that may need this particular benefit. If we were choosing Colorado Family, individuals would have that ability to file a claim to the state of Colorado. So we're trying to build something similar within the confines of the City of Boulder benefit package. Next slide. Our program currently is focused on seasonal and temporary employees. And again, with our other employment groups having disability benefits from either the standard insurance company or from FPPA for our public safety employees, it's important for us to focus on our seasonal and temporary employees who do not have access to that to the leave benefit. Our eligibility piece would be for all seasonal and temporary employees. Again, seasonal employees could be a handful of months, could be 9 months. We've seen 10-month seasonal employees and temporary employees for any length in any given year. Next slide. We needed to develop an amount of benefit payment as a potential for this program, and we developed a sliding scale to provide a full-time employee, somebody who is working 12 months a year, 40 hours per week, the 12 weeks of qualified income replacement leave, similar to that of the Colorado Family Program. Colorado Family Program would require medical documentation, et cetera, to qualify for that particular payment. We would do the same in some form. But the sliding scale we have made takes into consideration the length of the planned engagement for the seasonal temporary employee and the hours worked per week. And we have a sample of that on the next slide, please. I'm only showing you a handful of items here just to keep it simple, but you can imagine there's a column on this larger chart that we have in our office for each of the 12 months, 11 months, 10 months, all through, and a calculation for every hour increment that could exist in the grid in any given week. So it is 12 by 40, but you can see the very top left-hand quarter, 12 months, 40 hours per week would qualify for 480 hours of potential leave. 9 months, 40 hours a week, 360 hours of leave and income replacement. 6 months would be half of the 12-month value, 240 hours. And you see the increments down based on the number of hours worked per week. It's incumbent on us in this program to clearly identify an individual's status, how long we expect that engagement to be in months, and what that planned work week would look like, and be very deliberate and careful to make sure we have that process correctly, to make sure we're giving proper benefit to individuals. Next slide. The concept is that the employees would accrue these particular hours. So one of our learnings from the Healthy Family Workplace Act and emergency health leave is that we can dedicate certain leave types for certain activities. So this concept would allow seasonal and temporary employees to accrue specific leave for income replacement alongside their general sick leave. The general sick leave is a smaller amount based on the requirements of the Healthy Family Workplace Act. This would be in parallel and accrue in a different way. Our goal would be to have individuals accrue each pay period, and by the halfway point of their planned engagement with us, they will have accrued their full bucket of leave to use in case of personal injury or illness or family injury or illness. It would not be available for a general sick day, for a cold, for a fever, for illness of a child for a single day. It's more for the extreme leaves that would be covered by Family Medical Leave Act and the Colorado Family Program. So we're following that path of claim, submission, and approval. The next piece of this is to determine the payment amount. And while we have not yet determined or recommending a full percentage of pay for income replacement, we are modeling different samples based on the 60% to 90% income replacement available in the Colorado Family Program. And that 60% to 90% scale by Colorado Family is based on general earnings. We're not sure that that fits for this particular solution right now, but we're modeling that piece on a flat rate for any of our seasonal and temporary employees. Our next slide, please. This is the costing component here, and what we're noting is that with a percentage of potentially 10% of seasonal employees, seasonal and temporary employees using the program, there could be a cost of $200 to $250K in income replacement, with sort of a 75 to 80% estimate for income replacement at this time. The concern we have here is that we do not have a measurement of employee behaviors in regards to leave management right now. We know that our current employees use a series of our benefits at around that 10% level, accessing FMLA and the standard disability insurance, FPPA, et cetera. And we tried to apply that model, but we think it may be a touch high. The other piece we would not know at this time is a length of a period of leave. And right now we've modeled then based on a full allotment at the 12-month accrual rate, rather than kind of dialing back a 20-hour employee on a 6-month accrual would have a smaller amount available to them. So we're trying to build that proration into our cost estimates, so this may be a bit high. The last piece is we're still determining funding. We are in the development and exploration of this program, so we have not submitted directly for any budget component. We know that we have current wage budgets in departments for seasonal and temporary employees that are planned for wages that could be considered as part of the payment, but we have not yet determined that, nor have we made determination of requesting new funding at this time. This is a very different number than the $1.3 million that we expected the fees would be and contributions would be to the Colorado Family Program should we fully participate across all of our employment groups, standard employees, seasonals, and temporaries. Again, this covers only the approximately 900 to 1,000 individuals who work some part of the year in that seasonal and temporary category. 10% estimate of their usage, and a very large assumption that they'd be using a significant amount of hours. So with that, the intent here is not to dig deeply into the cost and processing of the Colorado Family Plan, though we know we are still waiting on information on how they will process claims and what the administration of that program will look like. But we're really building that safety net for our seasonal and temporary employees with this exploration and determining what we can provide to individuals who engage with us in shorter term employment, especially year after year employment. One last piece, we do have a couple of the thresholds in place that are a match to the Colorado Family Program. There is a requirement with Colorado Family that an individual earns $2,500 with an employer before they become eligible for the benefits. We have some small kind of run-in gates that we would have in place for this program as well. We want to make sure that individuals are working a significant portion of their seasonal employment or temporary employment before stepping into a leave, and then we were happy to focus on that income replacement with that staff member. Now our last slide is opening to council. The step we are at now is hearing feedback from you about the Boulder Seasonal Temporary Employee Program, and specifically questions for staff to consider about our proposed plan to support our seasonal and temporary employees with income replacement.
All righty. Does council have any question concerning the family program or the new City of Boulder Seasonal Temporary Employee Leave Program? Seeing none, well, yes, Nicole.
It's got to give us a second, Junie. It's been a long week. All right. So the I think most of my questions are just around kind of how would these benefits for the seasonal and temporary workers here in Boulder how does that compare to what folks would get if we were to enroll in the family program? I mean, I know, we decided we wouldn't last fall, but I think that's sort of in my mind as how do these things compare? So, for example, how quickly would, majority of our seasonal and temporary workers accrue leave hours and earn toward their total allotment under the family program versus under this program that you're proposing here?
So the first step there, thank you for the question. The first step there is around the initial eligibility requirement, and whether it would be our program or the Colorado Family Program, there's a minimum amount of earnings that have to come in place, that $2,500 minimum earning before a person could submit a claim. So we would follow that same first threshold of becoming eligible. At that point, we would have throughout the employment period of the seasonal and temporary employees an earning of a portion of their allotment based on their hours worked, and it is a half an hour per hour worked over the course of their employment, but we're elevating that. We're actually earning a half hour per hour worked each pay period, so that total it is a quarter of their whole earned time during their engagement period. The short way of saying that is that full-time 40-hour-a-week, 12-month employee would earn 480 hours. That's nearly 500, which is 1/4 of the standard 2,080 hours that individuals earn. So we're trying to make it available as soon as a person hits that $2,500 earning mark based on what they've accrued to date, and then continue earning and still have some earnings occurring once they return from their leave. The next piece in relation to the Colorado Family Plan is that the benefit of that program and this developing program is it covers personal injury and illness and family injury and illness, when many other plans, such as that short-term disability plan, only covers a personal injury or illness. We would engage with our short-term disability provider to determine the cost for claim processing. We can handle leave management within human resources. However, it's fairly low cost to have that quick turnaround processing when a person becomes eligible with our short-term disability and FMLA processor to be able to qualify that leave and begin the income replacement.
Thank you. And I think one of the other questions I have is, what are other cities doing around this kind of seasonal and temporary worker? I mean, is what we're talking about here kind of a newer thing for other local governments, for example, that didn't opt into the family program? Or other cities, do they do this kind of thing?
At this particular moment, we feel we are walking at a very similar pace in program development as a lot of other cities, counties, et cetera. Individuals have reported to us that they are tapping into their short-term disability vendor and asking the same questions we asked. Some organizations have put in a local program for all of their employees. We are not recommending that at this time, but we're starting to see people step in and address the seasonal and temporary employee group in a similar manner to what we're doing. In addition, we're all learning from the Colorado Family Program as they have a public comment, public hearing about the features of their plans, and they're just now beginning to communicate more of that information. And within the past month, they actually shared information on determining if an employee as a seasonal and temporary is qualified to submit wages to the Colorado Family Program. Meaning they're very much on the edge right now of how they collect contributions and how they qualify individuals in, but nothing about program development. So we're kind of out here working and chatting with our cohorts about what kind of plan might be available. I think this could be a more common solution within this year and next year for municipalities.
Thank you. And then I just have two more relatively quick questions, I think. Are there any employees then, if we were to put this in place for seasonal and temporary workers, are there any employees in our city that are not eligible for paid family medical leave? Like, does this kind of capture all the folks who aren't covered?
This is the group that council identified through conversation in November that we wanted to address because of that very issue. We felt that they were the employees that were not covered by our other disability programs. Fully covered for paid family leave, not exactly. We have a short-term disability that comes into place for personal injury and illness or disability through other vendors outside of our non-union plan. Union have different benefits. Those generally cover just the personal injury and illness, and then we have our sick leave and parental leave for other types of issues. So in general, we believe most injury and illness and FMLA family and personal protections are covered in some form. And this is the last bit of lack of coverage that existed for the city.
Okay, thank you. And then have we gotten any feedback from employees on what they think about this, or were you wanting to come to us first and then do some outreach to that group?
It is the latter. We wanted to hear from you, given our November 3rd conversation, and make sure that we brought this forward not only for your feedback, but also so that you would see the timing of the program, especially in relation to the budget. The message also delivered in November was that we were a bit late opting in to be able to choose to impact the budget or not by participation. So we certainly wanted to visit with you first, and now we will begin some general engagement. We do know that the seasonal employees have asked in small batches about different benefit plans over time. Hasn't been widespread, but we're ready to begin some version of engagement with our staff.
Thank you. Appreciate that, David. And Junie, do you want like any comments now, or do you want to do questions and then comments?
You're welcome to comment.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I really appreciate, that you all are thinking about this and how we can meet the needs of our seasonal and temporary workers. I think it's a group of workers that are often left out of really critical benefits. And I think I kind of came into this discussion tonight with just a little bit of a different memory of what it was we were going to be kind of talking about tonight. I think one of the things that I've been really interested in knowing about as we head into budgeting for 2024 is just a little bit more, in depth, like what's the benefit of, the family program versus the programs that we already have in place, kind of with this one captured too. And I may have been misremembering and misunderstanding our previous conversation. But, what I remembered from that was that we were going to be not opting in because of the kind of late decision, because we hadn't allocated any money for it in the budget, because we were still exploring what impact it might have on our employees relative to the benefits that they already had, but that we were going to be coming back to it in the course of the budgeting process and being able to think more about, do we want to step into this to have a more kind of intentional and mindful discussion, having gathered some of that information. So I think that, and that's my bad for not kind of looking at the packet a couple of weeks ago and giving, that feedback prior to this week. But I I think I would still like to have that discussion, because I don't really want to end up in a place, where maybe it's 10 years down the road and we're just starting to think about family. But, I think this is a really important program for people across the state and for employees. And I would still just like to know what does it mean to be a part of family versus not, and to be kind of putting together some other solutions as we're doing on our own, as others are engaging in family. So depending on, what other folks are interested in hearing about, I think that is still something I would love to hear about at some point.
Thank you. And I do apologize if I missed a little bit of the mark or a bunch of the mark, and we'll continue to work on this issue. Of course, we were really focused on this one gap in benefits primarily, knowing that we cover so many other pieces for all of our employees, and that we had some complexities in the web of benefits that we have, and there's some timing to undo certain components at certain times. But we are well aware, and it is a growing area of interest and conversation amongst our peers in other cities and counties. So you can rest assured that we will be engaged with this on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, and thank you. I don't mean to dismiss. I mean, it's clear that you all have put a lot of thought and work into trying to figure out how to cover our seasonal and temporary workers, and I really appreciate that we're thinking about those things. So thank you for all that you are continuing to do to understand these different programs and how we can help benefit our employees.
Thank you.
Next, Aaron.
And I've got comments, if that's all right, Jeannie. David, thanks so much to you and your department and the other finance people who contributed to this. This looks like a really well designed, thoughtful approach to helping out our seasonal and temporary employees with family and medical leave. So I'm proud that we're taking this step to plug this gap in our benefit system. Because I think from my memory of the conversation last fall was that your analysis generally showed that our benefits at the city were equal to or greater than those provided by the family program, which was why, I was comfortable at that time saying, okay, I guess we don't need to engage with that as a city because it looks like we're doing better, except that there was this gap for our temporary and seasonal employees. And you seem to have be proposing something that will ably plug that gap. So I really appreciate that, fully supportive. And then to Nicole's point, I think it'll be important to watch how the family program develops over the years, right? And as we go through different negotiations with our unions on different benefit packages, and just to always keep an eye on what the future of this program is, and to see if it ever might be a better fit for the city. But it seems pretty clear that right now we're on a really good path with this addition for the temporary and seasonal employees. So thanks so much for all your work. I'm very supportive.
Thank you.
Awesome. Next, we have Rachel and then Matt.
I'll be super quick. I just wanted to say thank you for bringing this back. This is what I was expecting us to talk about. And many of you will recall that I've complained over the years that we ask for things and then we never circle back. And so I actually had a little calendar note, make sure staff came back to us on this to make sure that seasonal and temp employees are not left behind. So I didn't have to act on that note. And I just want to say thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Matt?
Yeah, thanks, David, for this. And I agree with Rachel. This was kind of right in the wheelhouse of where I thought we would land on this. And I always viewed family as the floor, not the ceiling. And that I always had the expectations based on our city values that we would never just rest on the floor. We would always go above and beyond, because that's who we are as a community. And so I always viewed us being able to take that floor and expand and improve and go beyond that. And that's what we're doing, and filling this gap, I think, stays true to that. So I appreciate all the hard work in order for us to do that. And certainly, where Aaron pointed out of let's monitor it, I have expectations that we will always be exceeding what family is, because that's meant to be a floor for other folks that may not have the same threshold and level of commitment that we do. So I appreciate all that work, and really all to the entire city. It starts with Nuria and everybody else. That commitment to staff is really important. So thanks for following up with that.
Thank you, Matt. Rachel, your hand is still up.
Lazy.
Are there any other comments for David? Seeing none at this time, I just wanted to add, thank you for the presentation. And I appreciate the comments that you made because it put things into perspective for me. You mentioned the 1.3 million as opposed to the $200,000 to $250,000 coming from the city, and that somehow our programs are better or comparable to what the state is providing. And I understand as well, a lot of people at the Capitol, when they're drafting laws, they hope that the laws will be implemented, or if there is an opt-out process or portion, is that the cities or there will be other mechanism used as well to ensure that people get the coverages that they need. So ultimately, knowing the process, how it works, I mean, by reading the legislative declaration of that bill, I can see the intent of the drafters or the people who carried the bill, but ultimately seeing that our seasonal and temporary workers will be provided, so that gap will be plugged in. So ultimately, I would say we are moving in the right direction to ensure somehow, even though we're not opting into this particular program, we are doing the work. We are ensuring that community, not community members, but our workers who at times are community members as well are protected. So at first, when this first came before council, I was in full support of opting into the process, and hearing from what I'm hearing from you at this time, even though I still believe in the family program, I believe that the city is moving in the right direction, and ultimately, if eventually you decide to join into this particular process or program, I would welcome it. I think it would be great, but ultimately, I think we are doing the work, whether we are in or not into this particular program at this time, based on what I heard. So thank you for that. And are there any other comments coming from council at this time? Seeing none, forever hold your peace. No one else? Great. Well, thank you for coming by, David, and thank you for this presentation. And moving on right along, we are killing it tonight. The next conversation is the presentation on minimum wage, and I will pass it on to Nuria to set up. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And it is moving quite along. So thank you for that, council member. Our next conversation is really an update on what have been to date the minimum wage efforts. I know that Councilmember Folkerts has been leading that effort on behalf of council, and she is making her way over to the meeting as I am talking and trying to buy enough time. But if that's not there, we will, we have staff, and Taylor Ryman, as you all know, has been working with Councilmember Folkerts to really move in this direction, and has a staff presentation. I'll say last time we had spoken about the topic, you all voted to have Councilmember Folkerts be the council representative on a regional consortium that is looking at the issue of minimum wage. On this, and with that, we had staff supporting that work. And as I do not see Councilmember Folkerts, and I'm sure she'll be coming in shortly and provide a little bit more of context for that, Taylor, why don't I just suggest that you provide a little bit of that conversation and a presentation, and I'm sure we will, oh, there she is. I spoke just long enough, council member, to give you some time.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your patience, everyone. I just wanted to start with talking about why we're looking at minimum wage at the municipal and regional levels, the sort of origins of this effort. In 2019, the state legislature passed an ordinance that gave local governments the right to set their own minimum wage. And later that year, with support from then Councilmember Swetlick, the consortium began discussions on that topic. But as we all remember, 2019 was the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. 4 years later, we have some new council members. The pandemic is endemic, and we have felt numerous impacts to our economies, evidenced by sharp increases in inflation, interest rates, and cost of living in general. Wages in our community just haven't kept up with cost of living increases, and the differences are becoming more and more challenging for our community members to overcome. And this challenge is shared by many of our surrounding communities. So through the consortium of cities, a working group has formed to look at this issue collectively, because we recognize that changing the minimum wage in any community changes our regional economy. And many people in Boulder live in different communities than where they work. Boulder-based businesses, nonprofits, and other organizations have operations and customers throughout the country. And for these reasons and many others, we believe a regional approach to considering a minimum wage would be best for understanding and meeting the needs of our unique and interdependent economies, while also providing consistency for both employees and employers. In April of 2022, this council supported my participation in the minimum wage working group through the consortium of cities. And over the last year, that working group has met to examine the enabling legislation, understand the required process, and conduct early engagement with cities and stakeholders to initially assess the needs and interests of our communities. These conversations have established the foundation necessary for exploring this joint effort. And tonight, we are not proposing a recommendation or asking for a final decision on a wage target or timeline, but we're at a point where it would be helpful to have our council for all the various working group members weigh in on next steps. So tonight, we are checking in on your support for continued collaboration with the working group, and so that we can better scope the needs and next steps for future decision-making. With that, I'd like to kick it over to Taylor for the presentation.
Thank you so much, Lauren. And thanks so much for your continued leadership on this effort. Is everybody seeing my screen? All right, good evening, Council. Taylor Ryman, Assistant to City Council. And we're going to talk about the update on the work of the Minimum Wage Working Group through the Boulder County Consortium of Cities. So as Lauren mentioned, in 2019, the state lifted the preemption on local governments setting their own minimum wage laws. Here's some highlights from the bill. Ordinance adoption must be preceded by community engagement with the groups listed here. In addition to the reasons Lauren mentioned, the second piece is another big part of what's informed our regional approach. Only 10% of jurisdictions across the state can adopt a different minimum wage ordinance, but an IGA covering several municipalities within a county is considered one in that calculation. Next, any raise, either an escalation to a target or an annual adjustment, must coincide with the state increase on January 1st. And finally, escalation is limited to $1.75 or 15%, whichever is higher. So there's some statutory limits laid out in the bill, and on one hand, these reduce the decisions we'd need to make. On the other hand, it does create a one-size-fits-all approach that might not be suitable for all communities. Implementation date and dates for escalation and adjustments are fixed to January 1st. Employee time in a jurisdiction is covered, but passing through is not. It covers all workers and emancipated minors and does not allow exemptions for things like small businesses. And tipped wages can be $3.02 less than the adopted wage or whatever the state tip credit is, that those must align. On the policy discretion front, these are choices that we have a little bit more flexibility. In a regional approach, though, most of these discretionary items will need consensus from participating communities, except for items like enforcement and escalation schedules, which can be local decisions. So target and annual increase to reach that target. Typically escalation periods are about 3 to 5 years. After escalation, we can choose how to make regular adjustments into the future, otherwise known as indexing, whether or not to expand the wage to cover unemancipated minors, and we can rely on the state's existing enforcement system or create our own. So those are all things that we have more decision in. So the slide here outlines where the current wages are and communities pursuing the new authority. And for reference, City of Boulder falls under the state minimum wage at $13.65 an hour. This fall, we know that the state's going to announce the 2024 increase. And based on the first quarter of 2023 inflation estimates, we might see that adjustment in 2024 come to about $14.24 an hour if the 4.3% inflation rate from 2023 first quarter remains about that rate. City self-imposed living wage does exist for our workforce, and it is right now at $17.42. Denver was the first to pursue the new authority, and they completed the process in 3 months. This was supported by strong council engagement and years of engagement right beforehand on a self-imposed city minimum wage like we have. It was sort of a springboard into expanding that to a community-wide minimum wage. 2 weeks ago, CU campuses across the state raised their minimum wage to $16 an hour for students and $18 an hour for hourly workers. Last week, Fort Collins considered an ordinance. Council did vote against it, and their direction was to consider to pursue a regional approach. Pretty cool idea. This is just to give an idea of where we're at right now. As you can see, there is several movements on raising wages across the state. So these are some possible target wage approaches. And like Lauren said, we're not asking for a decision on a target tonight. Council, this is your first real update on this work, and we wouldn't bring a decision like that to you at this stage. But we wanted to outline what wage approaches could look like. These are not staff recommendations. They're either external recommendations or local wages that fall outside the state minimum. They demonstrate a spectrum of options, and while some may be appropriate for us to duplicate, the best option for our community is still to be determined. At a forum on April 24th, the Colorado Center for Law and Policy presented a guiding wage proposal based on the November 2022 self-sufficiency wage report. It would raise it to the wage to $15 an hour and 41 cents in 2024, so next year, with an increase of 12.9% until reaching the target of $25 an hour in 2028. The city already has our own living wage, and lastly, wages could attempt to align with our metro or university partners who already well exceed the state minimum. Next, we'd like to talk about the actual working group efforts. The communities listed here have been involved over the last year. Boulder County, they have a little bit lower of a stake in the game just because they don't have a lot of major workforce centers. And so a minimum wage with their participation would only apply to unincorporated county. So while they are a bit of a lower player in the game, they have been a really important convener for the working group and just helping facilitate all of our conversations. City of Boulder, of course, is a working group member. City of Louisville has this on their work plan, and they've been a strong partner. Longmont is another strong partner, and they will be receiving a similar update to the one tonight on January 6th. So your feedback here will also inform that update. We did some early engagement over the last year, and full engagement has not been launched, but we've had limited check-ins with chambers of commerce, labor groups, and the university. Some stakeholders have been aware of the last year's efforts of the working group, and they started engaging groups in February to advance minimum wage conversations across the county. For example, the Boulder Area Labor Council hired Siegel Long Public Affairs to do community engagement and advocacy work and convene a coalition. They are calling themselves the Boulder County Self-Sufficiency Coalition, and they formed in February. They continue to meet with elected representatives across the county, including the working group communities, Longmont, Lyons, Lafayette, and others. They've got 24 labor groups represented in the coalition, and I'm not going to list them all, but I'll highlight just a few names. Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, National Employment Law Center, New Era Colorado, Together Colorado, Towards Justice. There's several others. That's just a few. And many of these groups work across jurisdictions and have membership throughout Boulder County. Mentioned on the previous slide, in April 2023, the coalition did host that community forum to hear from workers and invited elected officials to that. That's where they presented their guiding proposal. And while there are differences in how much and how quickly to make minimum wage changes, there is strong agreement that this should be done regionally. We checked in with the Boulder Chamber, and while the Chamber has supported previous statewide increases, they would oppose any minimum wage increase without thorough review of impacts and benefits that engage the Boulder Chamber membership and other business stakeholders. To support the time needed for engagement and review, their preference is for later implementation and a regional approach. Checking in with CU. As a state entity, legally, they're not required to comply with city's minimum wage laws. And in light of their recent wage raise, anything below $16 really wouldn't have an impact to them. They do have a strong desire to meet or exceed any city minimum wage to stay competitive and ensure that employees are adequately compensated. And they want to work with city leaders throughout the county if this were pursued on anything going on, because implementing increases and planning those items does take a long time to plan. And as I mentioned, the Boulder County Self-Sufficiency Coalition is advocating for their proposal and the quickest timeline that we can manage. So this draft timeline is part of what prompted our check-in with council. It was drafted by Boulder County. It lays out steps needed to implement a new wage on January 1st, 2024 was the proposal. And this is what brought us to check in with council, understanding that there are a lot of different needs in our different communities. We appreciate the timeline in that it lays out sort of the chunked steps that are needed to get to implementation. But we want to be mindful that we need to check in with all of our communities on when that implementation date might be. Scoping and community engagement is a next step, and moving forward does not commit us to any outcome. At any point in the process, any of our local governments would retain the option of going forward separately or stepping out of a regional effort as desired. And so, as I understand it from conversations from attorneys, what would need to happen is, in the legal sense, we draft an MOU, and then we would create a model ordinance and shop it around to communities and get a consensus on the parts of a model ordinance. And then we would adopt an ordinance as an item with an IGA. And that's how a regional approach would be pursued. While we've worked together to understand the legislation, outline the needs, and get an early sense of stakeholder views, the scope has not yet been fully defined. For our city, the scope may include the items listed here, and most notably, we'll need community engagement, equity and financial analyses, drafting agreements and ordinance language. And there's also opportunities for creative resourcing and sharing the work if other communities take the lead on deliverables, seeking outside help from consultants or our university partners, going in on different RFPs, between multiple communities. Those costs could be shared. And finally, we present you with these council questions tonight. Does council wish to continue with this regional effort towards the establishment of a regional minimum wage and have staff scope this item for addition to the existing work plan? Should scope consider implementation of 2024 or 2025? Would regional participation impact council's will to pursue an approach? And if council would like us to continue moving forward, does council have any feedback on the timeline or engagement approach?
Thank you, Taylor. We have council questions at this time. Please raise your hand if you have any. We see right now Bob and then Matt.
Thanks, Judy. Thanks, Taylor. That was a great presentation. Thanks, Lauren. Just two questions now. I'll have some comments in a second, but two questions. One, what I didn't hear in the presentation, I heard a lot of advocacy. Sounds like there's a lot of people who are advocating for various things. But I didn't hear a whole lot of economic analysis by independent economists. What work has been done around that as far as what impacts there would be on businesses, the local economy, employees, and all sorts of stakeholders? What work has been done with neutral economists to evaluate those things, and where are those reports if that's been done?
Great question, Bob, and I can jump in on this one. So the most recent self-sufficiency wage report in 2022 is one piece of data that we have. And as we consider next steps, one of the things that we might look into is what those analyses would require, which jurisdictions they would include, and figuring out how we could get a sense of where is the local economy, who does make the minimum wage, what businesses would this impact and who would not be impacted, what's a benefit cliff perhaps of raising the minimum wage and then pushing people out of eligibility for certain benefits. Those things certainly need to be studied, but we're not quite at that point. It'd be a next step.
Yeah, you hit on, Taylor, you did a great job of hitting on many of the questions that I would have for an economist. And it sounds like the answer is we haven't, or the regional consortium hasn't hired an independent economist to do that work. Unless, Lauren, are you aware, has that, some of the things that Taylor mentioned and probably a few others, has that been done by independent? I'm not talking about advocacy, I'm talking about independent analysis, something by like a Rich Wobekin at CU or somebody like that who doesn't have, a dog in the fight.
Right. We haven't taken that step to look at Boulder yet. In the implementation of Denver's ordinance, they had to have, the state actually reviewed all the data that they had available, and were able to, they published a report on sort of the effect that Denver's wage had on their economy and their businesses. Now that was during COVID, so they make a note about that being a little bit hard to extrapolate out, but there is some data in terms of implementation in nearby cities.
Great. So it sounds like Denver has already kind of created at least the data they collected may not be relevant either because it's Denver or because it was during COVID or because it was a few years ago, but it sounds like Denver's at least created a roadmap for the types of things that an economist would look at. So that's great. And then I think
in the state enabling legislation, it's actually part of what's required. So
great.
If we were to go through with this,
I think you mentioned that. It sounded like Denver had been working on that for quite some time, even before they passed their ordinance. So what would be there was a very aggressive timeline. I'll comment on that in a second, but I'm just trying to understand, still saying with questions, like where in that timeline that was really only about 6 or 7 months long, would that economic work be done? Where would that be done, like next month or the month after, or how long would that take?
That's a great question. So I know Fort Collins did worked with a consultant to survey employers. It wasn't a market analysis, but it was an employer survey of where things stood. And that cost for that was around $20,000 or $30,000. We'd have to check in with them and see how long they took to do that. But I imagine that would inform community engagement and probably either have to coincide with community engagement or go before it.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Taylor. I think it either, I suppose it could be done in parallel, but in a perfect world, it would be great if it was done before, because then that probably was informed some of the questions you'd ask the community and businesses. That's great. Well, that was just kind of one line of questions. The second line of questions is, again, the timeline looked really tight there and had 2 months for community engagement. We got hundreds of businesses, and we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars here. So I was just kind of wondering, and we got a letter from the chamber that said they really hadn't, somebody's checked in with them, but they really haven't been fully engaged. I know the 2 months was set aside in that timeline for community engagement. What's the community engagement plan during that 8 or 9 weeks with all those hundreds of businesses that would be affected? What can anyone elaborate on what the community engagement plan is? Because if that's going to happen in 2 months, then it sounds like it's going to be like July and August. So we must be pretty far along in our thinking about what that engagement would look like.
So that's part of why we're also checking in with you, is because that is an aggressive timeline. We acknowledge that accomplishing that timeline would take a lot. And if we were to have a 2024 implementation, we'd really need to hit the ground running on community engagement. And that's also assuming in a regional approach that all of our other partners would want to hit the ground running in doing that too. Boulder County has offered to host some joint forums. And so again, to sharing the work a little bit, we could all come together and share some of the community engagement needs and the other scoping needs. But if we had a little bit longer of a timeline, we'd be able to maybe flesh out a longer amount of time dedicated to that.
Yeah, it sounds like a great idea, Taylor, to coordinate with the county and with the other cities, because we do have employers that are in multi-cities. So I think that's a really swell idea. Whether we can do that in 2 months or not, I don't know. We'll talk about that in a second. But it sounds like you guys are starting to think about the right things as far as this process. So those are the questions I had.
Great. Thank you, Bob. I just want to make sure I get the names right. Is it Mark is next? You're next, Mark.
Okay. What is the implication? Well, first of all, thank you for the presentation, both Lauren and both of you, and Taylor. What's the implication of Fort Collins not approving and saying they want a regional approach? I don't see them listed as one of the cooperating cities, are they? Are they part of the mix?
No, they're not part of our effort. We have been meeting with them on a regular basis just to continue to be appraised of what we have going on. They sort of voted on their item last week and we had an update this week. So it made a lot of sense for us to check in on where things were at. Their council really liked the idea of a regional approach and gave their staff direction that they didn't want to do this in isolation. I know Fort Collins has done a little bit of legwork in trying to build coalition partners across Larimore and Weld. They haven't gotten a ton of traction on that yet, but we'll see in the future if those ideas change. The other thing that Fort Collins received direction to do was to pursue an amendment to the current legislation that would allow more flexibility for exemptions around small businesses and tipped workers, because in Fort Collins, at least, their biggest feedback from the business community and the pushback was around those two items. So if there was a little bit more flexibility in being able to implement a law, it might be more advantageous for their community and perhaps others to pursue.
So we're engaged with them and hopefully working with them going forward.
Yep, got to check in with them tomorrow morning, let them know what happens tonight.
And again, thank you both for the work. It's this is a great presentation. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark, Rachel, and then Matt.
Thanks, everyone. Just two questions. And I think from Bob's questions, I probably know the answers, but have we done any analysis on the city budget with the proposal? Like what it would mean for us as a city, because we have a lot of employees. I don't know that any of them make minimum wage, but dovetailing with my next question, often you're trying to be a bit above minimum wage as to different job categories. So just wondering, have we looked at that?
I will let finance answer that question. Hi, Kara.
Good evening, Kara Skinner, Chief Financial Officer. We have done some preliminary analyses, and it would definitely have a budget impact. But again, that's a consideration that council would need to weigh against other goals of a program like this. But there would definitely be a minimum wage impact because we do have seasonal temps are not subject to our living wage. So it's, again, that same group. So it's largely in our parks and recreation and open space and mountain park and transportation funds that would be impacted.
Thanks. And then my second question, probably to Taylor, and I've talked about it a bit with Lauren. I worked, I suppose I gravitate towards companies that are in the nonprofit sector and don't have a lot of money above minimum wage. So I worked at a company that provided direct care staffing, sort of a healthcare setting for people with developmental disabilities and people exiting homelessness. And when the minimum wage was hiked by the federal government in around, I don't know, 2008 maybe, it was a real hit to the organization because we always tried to stay like $2 above minimum wage. And so just wondering, has there been any analysis on how this would impact nonprofits particularly, but healthcare settings that are really reliant on Medicaid dollar reimbursements where they can't just, charge clients or make up the difference some other way. So what has the analysis been for companies that can't again charge more for their services really and are reliant on government contracts? And I don't know if that's been shown how it played out in Denver. I think one thing that we would not want to do is, especially with an aging population on the horizon, drive out a workforce that we're really going to need to provide for our most vulnerable. Has there been analysis there?
So no analysis in Boulder. We do know, again, from our partners over in Fort Collins that this was a major area of concern in their efforts. I'm not sure quite what Denver did, but the known issue areas, tipped workers, the healthcare setting, small businesses would be part of what informs our community engagement plans. We'd probably want to have very specific questions around those concern areas and try our best to create something that would accommodate, knowing that there are some statutory limitations laid out in the bill.
Okay. And is that something that we can specifically ask for you to make sure that we're looking at for Boulder, with regard to other cities that have done it? Like, what are the ripple effects on those settings? Okay, thanks.
If I may add to that, just before we move on, it is something that I know Councilmember Folkerts has asked us to think about, that if the direction today is to move forward and make this a work plan item, as we think about the partners that Taylor mentioned, like CU or other consultants, to make sure we're thinking about it and looking at specific industries where we know the impacts and the ramifications may be different. And so I just wanted to lift that up, that I know Councilmember Folkerts has flagged that for us to continue to look at.
Thanks. And in case I didn't make it clear, like a reason that you have to stay a couple dollars an hour over minimum wage for those jobs is that people don't want to do those jobs. Like you really have to draw people to do those jobs. And so we just have to be mindful of, if you can work at fast food or a cafe or something, which are also highly needed jobs. If we can't get those above whatever we set as minimum wage, we're going to have a really hard time filling those. Thanks.
Absolutely. And having done this in Minneapolis, when we did this in 2016, nursing homes were a big issue because of that federal reimbursement, the Medicare reimbursement. So something to pay particular attention to. And so we'll be looking, if that is the will of council, to continue to go deeper into those specific industries.
Thanks.
Thank you. Matt, you're next.
Thanks, Junie. Appreciate the deep work, Lauren, that you're doing on this on behalf of us. That's just really awesome that you're sinking into this really deeply and helping lead the way. And Taylor, thanks for supporting that. My question kind of has to do with how do we define regionality? We define regions for different things at different radii, more or less, from our community. And so I'm just curious in this instance, I guess really my question / concern is Boulder County not quite regional enough to really actually meet the intended goals, or that sort of broad breadth of it necessary to keep competitive playing field even among some of our sister communities? I think of the hospitality industry and I'm worried, like, okay, if we do this, do some of our restaurants and hospitality businesses flee to Arvada in Jefferson County? Do they go north to Fort Collins? So those are all pretty lateral transitions. And so I'm just wondering, how are we defining that regional approach, and how are we bringing those folks like Adams, Laramie, Jefferson into the mix and in that sense, or are they working independently? So I'm just kind of curious how we define regionality for a project like this.
Thanks, Matt. And actually outlined in the legislation, as I said, there's a 10% cap on who can enact, but folks in an IGA would only count as one in that calculation, but it has to be folks within the county that count as that one in the calculation. And so I think that I'm not sure how it would work out if like Fort Collins could necessarily join our effort, or another community, let's say outside of Boulder County, joined our effort, how that would work in the 10% calculation. But the way it's laid out in the state bill, it makes it most advantageous for regionality to be defined by county.
No, that's helpful context. And certainly if one county as an IGA counts as just one, then I guess I'm curious that as a unit, how are we then reaching out to those other sort of single IGA units that border our county to, again, maintain that level playing field in that sense? So are we having those? I would assume Fort Collins would be part of the Laramie and others. So are we trying to have that geographic spread in our outreach to, one, either know they're interested, or is there a way that even though we're doing our own thing, can we kind of work from an even playing field? So I'm just wondering if those higher level conversations among what would be separate IGAs more or less is occurring, or is there intent to do so?
I think so, because this effort sort of originated with the consortium of cities. That's really why we've been focusing on Boulder and Boulder County. I've been having conversations with other communities outside of this, as as other people are as well. And it's there hasn't been a community yet that's been really on board and asked if they could join sort of our working group. I think that we would probably be open to that. But we haven't had that conversation yet because there sort of isn't while other communities are also looking at this that are outside of Boulder County, it hasn't been clear that there is enough momentum for them to join with just yet. And so I think it's a good question and something we'll keep trying to pursue I think, the more we can coordinate with the surrounding communities, I think that only serves to benefit all of us. But it's not quite there yet. And I have a feeling that once this gets more momentum, we might see increased interest from surrounding communities as well.
Great, thank you, Matt. Are there any other questions from council at this time? Seeing none, the question for council, do you wish to continue with this regional effort and have staff scope this item? And should the scope be considered for implementation in 2024 or 2025? And would regional participation impact council's will to pursue an approach? That's the first question. And then the second, if council would like us to continue to move forward, does council have any feedback on the timeline or engagement or approach? Now I see Bob.
Yeah, I'll start, Junie, with the questions. Thanks. So absolutely, this should be a regional effort. I'm happy that we're talking to our partners, at least in the county. I think Matt raises a really, really good point about the fact that so many of the people who actually make minimum wage or near minimum wage in our city probably don't necessarily live in the county. So I think we need to be looking farther south and farther east. If they don't want to join us, they don't join us. But and I know there's legal constraints there as well, but it is going to feel a little artificial to just draw the boundaries around the Boulder County limits. And I think we're going to miss the mark a little bit, and we may have some unintended economic consequences. We started to talk about, and I want to elaborate more about the very, very big importance of doing an economic analysis here. It sounds like there's been little done, at least regionally, around that. And so that's a super big, I would think, almost next step for this regional, whatever the definition of regional is, regional approach. And then the engagement is going to be super, super important. I mean, there's two ways we could do this, the hard way and the easy way. The hard way is just to jam it down the throats of hundreds of businesses. And Rachel, I think, started to touch on some of the businesses that really would not have the ability to pass along this extra expense to their, call them customers, sometimes they're patients. And so I think we have to be very, very thoughtful and careful about community engagement. There's no way that we can do adequate community engagement in 2 months. I'd be surprised if we could do it in 2 years, but 2 months, that's just crazy. So I'm moving on to the second question. Absolutely not. January 1, 2024 is just a jam. There's been little or no economic analysis, been little or no community engagement. And Matt raises a really, really great point about who even is the region. So I think it's great to be talking about this. And I really commend staff and Lauren for leading the charge in this. It should be regional. There's a ton of work ahead of us. I hope we get something done here. I don't want to back into an artificial number. I know some of our advocates started at $25 and did the math on what it would take to get there. I think we need to go from the bottom up, not the top down, and start at an artificial number. I think we need economists to tell us what the appropriate wages can be and should be, and the impacts on businesses, both businesses that can pass along those costs and businesses and nonprofits that can't. And so that's the first step. And it seems to me, I don't know if that takes 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, but it's going to be done. And then second, we have to have adequate engagement. We got a letter from our chamber, which represents hundreds of our businesses, both small and large, that said that they really hadn't been adequately engaged. And if they were forced into a situation where there was some artificial date put out there and says, all right, we're going to do this on January 1, come hell or high water, that they were going to be opposed. That would just be absolutely horrible in our community to say, all right, January 1, 2024, we're going to do this. We don't really care what people think. So we need to slow down. This is great work. On a scale of 1 to 10, we're at about step 2. And so we got lots more steps ahead of us here. That might happen in 2025. I don't know, but let's let it take the time it takes with the economic analysis and the community engagement. If that takes 2 months, great. I doubt it. 2 years, that's fine too. I just simply don't know, but we need to take a deep breath and do the analysis. Otherwise, we're going to end in the same place as Fort Collins did, which sounded like it was a rushed effort. and this council just says phooey. And I don't want to end it with phooey as an answer. I want us to get to a good answer, but do it in a way that's thoughtful and deliberate and inclusive of all members of our community. Thanks.
Thank you, Bob. Mark, and then Aaron.
I think FUI is a great answer. No. I am very supportive about moving forward with this. I think we're in the right direction. I'd have to agree with Bob that trying to do this in the next 6-7 months is just not realistic. Something's going to be cut short, and I suspect it will be the community engagement portion of the process. It would probably curtail the economic analysis that we need, but I don't want that to detract from the fact that we ought to move forward on this and build that coalition, try to make the region as comprehensive as we can. And, you know, Matt was talking about regionalization. I'd like to see that as robust as is possible, so that we're not creating a situation where one community doesn't buy in and tries to attract businesses at lower wage levels. But I think it's good. I think we're moving and trending in the correct direction. I just think we need to be a little bit realistic about it. All of those steps are not going to be completed rather in the next couple of months. And so with that in mind, I still think we need to be doing the work that we're doing. Lauren, it's great work that you're doing. Taylor, I think we just need to keep going and keep, pushing the thing along. So my answer is yes to everything, but realistically, 2025 is the inception date that I would support, so that everybody gets a chance to be heard and we can formulate whatever exceptions we want and go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. You're next, and then Nicole.
Well, first, I just want to give an enormous thank you to Lauren for working really, really hard on this with our regional potential partners over the last year plus. So I know it's not been easy, but you're bringing people along really well, and also to Taylor for helping out from the staff perspective and doing a huge amount of work on this as well. So I know council hasn't heard a lot about this, recently, but these processes have been underway for quite some time. There have been a lot of conversations going on for a lot of time. So they're starting to bear fruit, which is exciting. So thanks for all you've done to make that happen and get us to this point. I do very much want to see us continue to take a regional approach. We've put a lot of work into into working with partners and seeing how we can come along and work together. I think when we work together regionally, then our residents and workers share in the benefits, and then our businesses have shared common expectations and requirements as well. So I think it's all to the better to have the regional approach. So let's keep at that, and as broad as we can make it, the better. And so let's keep on that. I'll take a little bit of a different approach from my previous two colleagues here in terms of timing, though, because I'd like us to keep the possibility of January 2024 in mind. And I want to make the point that the enabling legislation from the state really constrains our choices here. So we can't elevate by an enormous amount in 1 year, and we can't carve out all kinds of exceptions because it doesn't allow that. And it does mandate a certain level of outreach and analysis. So great points about the need for economic analysis. It's incredibly important that we do outreach to our community, particularly the business community, and particularly to hear from our local small businesses and our local nonprofits, to Rachel's point, that could be impacted and have challenges with additional rates. But just keep in mind that there's only so much we can do this year. So if we're focused in our outreach and we do a great job with that, and we do listen to folks, and we may have the opportunity to go ahead and establish a modest additional wage that's allowed, that could start getting some people in those lowest wage brackets a little bit of help, as long as we're doing the outreach to bring people along in the meantime. So I'd still like to have that as a potential goal. And hey, if it needs more time, if we're getting, maybe 3 months from now, we say, you know what, it's just not doable this year, then, we can work with that. But I'd like us to keep that option on the table to see if we can move forward in at the end of this year. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Erin. Now we have Nicole and then Matt.
Thank you. And just want to echo everybody's thanks, Taylor and Lauren, for all of your work on this. Really appreciate it. So yes, to the first question, I think that, we really just kind of need to keep the scope as it's needed to get to where we need to be. So I think, taking a little more time to make sure that we are doing this appropriately and helping the people that we're trying to help is going to be really important. Frankly, regional participation doesn't affect my interest in this. I think it's great if we can get it. And there's a lot of folks in our community that need some support right now. So for me, that regional participation doesn't impact my desire to pursue an approach, though it would be good. And as far as feedback for moving forward, I think, the reason that we're going in this direction is because we have more and more people in our community who are really struggling to meet their basic needs. Housing and other costs of living keep going up at rates that are much, much higher than wages. And it's leaving more and more people in very precarious economic positions. I don't think we need an economic analysis to tell us this. We're really seeing record numbers at our food banks. We see rising evictions. We see rental costs that keep going up every year. And we see businesses that are having a hard time recruiting and retaining workers. So I think this aspect of increasing wages, it really is something that we need to do to try to get people to stay in our city and be able to work here. And ideally, we go as fast and as far as possible. And I don't want to rush and lose a really important opportunity to hear from people who are most impacted, like the families that groups like EFA serve. We also got a letter from EFA today. They have hundreds and hundreds of families that they're serving. I think they're up to now 600 individuals a week. So also a very important constituency for us to be hearing from. If we can't kind of get to the self-sufficiency wage stage and do that at a regional level, I think getting to just matching what Denver is doing, to me, feels like a good place to move forward. But I really don't want to do 2 years of engagement, but taking this year to do some engagement and getting to a sustainable long-term plan so that wages can stop falling so far behind the costs of basic human needs like housing and childcare and food and everything else that we need to keep ourselves living in safety and dignity. That to me is the most important part. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicole. Do you support 2024, 2025?
I think it really depends on the engagement that we can do. For me, doing this right is more important than and doing it in a way that's going to allow us to get to something that we can carry forward in future years so that we're not having to come back every year or two and redo this discussion, I think is critical. So I'm going to have a non-answer for that question. As long as it takes to hear from the folks in the community who are going to benefit from this. I think that's my biggest thing, but it doesn't seem like we necessarily need 2 years of engagement to do that either. So if I have to put a timeline on it, like 6 to 9 months of engagement, maybe it seems like we could have an idea by then, which probably wouldn't lend itself to a 2024 in implementation unless we were to implement mid-year or something like that.
Thank you, Nicole. Matt?
Appreciate that. Interesting comments. I think staying the course is fine by me. I think we've sort of laid out a good track on this so far. I appreciate Erin's optimism and hope of 2024. I just don't see how we do that. I share that optimism, but I think pragmatically speaking, it's going to be 2025. Even with, where Nicole was going with regards to outreach, if our start time is January 1 every year, and that's by law, it's 2025 is the earliest we're going to do this meaningfully. So I think that's kind of a foregone conclusion in that capacity. I think I think regional participation kind of needs to be kind of a prerequisite here. I understand the great need, and the letter from EFA is heartbreaking, but my big concern is if we're boosting wages at the expense of either losing businesses or them laying people off, we're actually creating more harm for a lot of individuals who need those wages because now they have no wage at all. And so I want to be very careful that we're on sort of a knife's edge of how we throttle that legislation to meet the need. And I think we have to be really intentional about that. And I'll just pick on the hospitality industry in particular. They are far behind every other industry in terms of coming back after COVID. And they are on more of a knife's edge than anything. And I've already talked to a few restaurant owners in town about this, and they are very concerned because they're already on tiny margins, and a 12% per year annual cost increase would devastate many of our hospitality businesses in our community. So I don't want to be taking that we have to cater completely to that, but we need some intentionality and need some better understanding of how we're going to have those impacts, because ultimately I think, to one of the points that was made, we want this to last, as Nicole said. And so to doing so, we need both those who are going to benefit, but also those who are going to be harmed and the business going to be hurt, to really all be on board. And we need that momentum to make sure this lasts and has proper staying power, because I think this has a great potential to improve a lot of people's lives, but we got to make sure it's done so in a way that doesn't then create just as much harm on the back end. So I think that regional approach to me seems like probably one of the better ways to get there. And so anyway, those are my thoughts on that.
Thank you, Matt. Rachel?
Thanks, Junie. Yeah, for the 2024 versus 2025, I do think, because my understanding is we can only like pull the trigger for effective January 1st, and that leaves us just 6 months. That's tricky at this point, and it's nobody's fault. Like, we started this work in 2019 and we're just coming to us right now. So that's a bummer timing, because I would think by the time we vote on something to get it implemented January 1st, regionally especially, so it's multiple cities doing multiple steps and outreach, it seems pretty infeasible. I'm certainly not opposed to it if everything was done properly and correctly, but or adequately, that it seems like that would be a tall order today. Not opposed to it though, if it could happen. And again, I just want to reiterate, like, I would be very worried about doing something without extensive analysis and engagement with the nonprofits who I think serve the most vulnerable in our community. So I agree with Nicole. We need to look at the individuals that EFA is supporting, and also we want to make it that sort of the organizations that staff those organizations are still here. So I don't want to, I don't want us not to be able to staff a homeless shelter or Fraser Meadows or any other number of places where people do work that are most vulnerable, and probably all of us are going to need as we age. So I don't think that the economic analysis is going to tell me whether I want to raise the minimum wage. It's what is sustainable and feasible for a raised minimum wage. So that's the analysis I want. And again, I just really think it needs to include all the facets of nonprofits' abilities to remain viable, as well as other businesses. And then I would be a little bit worried about not doing a regional approach. I think I would want an economic analysis of that if we were going to go the other way with it. I know that it's already a little bit hard for us to be competitive with some of the businesses that are not in Boulder due to some different structures here. And so I would not want to, go to $20 an hour minimum wage over the course of X years, or plan for that, knowing that, the L's and the other surrounding cities are going to be more like 15, and then all of our product prices go up. And I just don't know how that's economically sustainable for us as a city. And I don't think we can be dismissive of that. So if we were going to pull out of a regional approach, I think that I would want just to understand what the ripple effects would be, and whether we are viable and sustainable as a in the business world if we were to do that. Does that answer all the questions I needed to, Junie?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. I'd like to add as well, if there's no one else who would like to add anything else at this time. I fully support the regional approach. I would like, and thank you both Lauren and Taylor for all the work that you've been doing on this particular project. As far as implementation, when I first, prior to council, I was closer to 2024, But after hearing the conversation here today, it makes sense to move closer to 2025 because again, we've just talked about we don't want to push this forward at the expense of community engagement. So I welcome those comments made by my colleagues. So 2025 makes more sense at this time. And please do push for the regional approach. And yeah, and I want to summarize a little bit of what I heard. I know the first Mayor Brockett, Aaron mentioned 2024, but so far what I've heard closer to 2025, which is not too far from what your question was. Should scope consider implementation in 2024, 2025? So I think based on what I heard tonight, it's closer to 2025. Matt mentioned 2025, closer to 2025, Mark 2025. Nicole looked at the timeline in 2024, did not seem to be the right timeline. Bob mentioned take as much time needed or necessary and also do the economic research. And also Matt mentioned the research to not do harm to the communities that we want to support and help as well. And throughout, we've heard the regional approach from Rachel and the fact that a more realistic timeline would be 2025 and also do the research necessary to ensure that we take into account the different businesses in our community, whether it's nonprofit or other businesses. And I also wanted to note that one of the things that I heard earlier, even though you intend to do this economic research, I heard you mention that you've been working with our current chamber, and the chamber is a big resource when it comes to businesses. And I hope you will lean on that as well as part of the work that you are doing. Thank you. And I'll pass it on to Nuria.
Yeah, just I think Junie, you did a wonderful job, and thank you so much for summarizing that. I see Lauren has her hand up, and I want to make sure that Taylor gets what she needs. But in essence, as I think about it, what I'm hearing is a yes, put that on the work plan staff so that we can get Taylor some additional support as she is moving forward. Because I know Carl and Laurel Witt and CAO, others have been helping, but this is a bigger conversation. And to continue to work regionally with our partners to figure out and come back to you with a little bit more of a scoping, because that may be dependent on what resources we use, what funding we may need if we're doing economic analysis, hiring consultants, or if that is shared across the region as we move forward. So we will continue to work, obviously, with Councilmember Folkerts as we move forward. But the fundamental question I heard is yes, move forward as a work plan item, scope appropriately with partners, and keep all the caveats and what you have told us in mind as we're moving forward. Councilmember Folkerts and Taylor, just want to make sure you all got what you needed.
Yeah, I did. Thank you, Nuria, and thank you, Taylor, and thank you everyone for weighing in on this and helping provide direction for us to move forward, and we really appreciate it.
And I'll just chime in on that. Thank you so much, Council. The work of the last year is very much helped out with your feedback and direction tonight. We'll be sure to circle back with our municipal partners. As I said, we got to check in with Longmont in a couple weeks, and we'll also circle back with our stakeholders who weighed in early and let them know how we're moving forward, the next steps. Really appreciate it.
Thank you both, Taylor and Lauren, for this great presentation. And also I wanted to note Councilmember Weiner is in here with us. So welcome and thank you for being here. And actually that ends this portion of our meeting. Are there any last comments, business that we would like to discuss? Nicole.
Thank you. I was ready to go really fast this time with that little hand raise. Thanks, Junie. I just kind of wanted to mention, because I think, this issue of wages and how many people are struggling right now, I think is one that we're becoming more and more sensitive to in many different discussions. And one thing that was clear to me in the course of our discussion about the minimum wage increase tonight is that there really are multiple ways of getting people to self-sufficiency. I think anything that we can do to decrease housing, utility costs, offset childcare and healthcare costs, helping people with food and other basic needs, some of which, we're already starting to think about and do, but I just hope that, as we move forward with other kinds of policies that we're already working on and that are farther along this year, we can kind of keep that in mind, that we don't have to put all our eggs in one basket. We've got lots of ways that we can try to adjust the ability for people to live with safety and dignity in our community. And I appreciate that we're starting to have more of these conversations. So thanks to everybody and staff for continuing to elevate this issue.
Thank you, Nicole. Are there any other comments at this time? Any further comment? I'll just wait a minute. I know I moved too fast. Aaron.
Great meeting, Junie. Done at 8:19. It's setting the bar high.
Oh, thank you. I could not have done it without you and all the other council members. So if there is no further business, thank you so much. I hope you have a great night. And this concludes our meeting at 8:20 p.m. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your night, council.